You can go ahead. Start.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Hello. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, I was confused if I was online.
No, we just muted ourselves. You can start. You're
Hmm.
online.
So can everyone see my screen? Okay. I'm assuming.
Yeah, we can. We can. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So today my topic is crystal field theory from a group theoretic approach. We have encountered this topic before, but today we'll be focusing mostly on how symmetries play a role in whatever we have learned. We first encountered this in 2016 autumn, our first year chemistry course on inorganic physics by R.N.M. Mukherjee, where we were introduced to Christoffel theory as a means of explaining why we have exceptions in complexes in transition metal complexes. Like the metal complexes showed unexpected color properties, magnetic moments, and all. So which couldn't be explained by basic d orbital filling and all. So this theory was used to explain how geometry could give rise to exceptions, and then it could break some things or change them inherently. The theory is inherently a very simplistic one. We have we assume the ligands to be point charges that are approaching at a certain geometry, and based on it, we see how the d orbitals of the metal split up due to this external repulsion. We mainly focused on how the repulsion will influence the molecule. We mainly like how much the splitting will happen, and how the degree of splitting will influence the different properties. But we never really questioned on why the splitting happens or why in that sort of a fashion. And we encountered three geometries of crystal field: octahedral, tetragonal, and square planar. You can easily see that even though the octahedral and tetragonal complexes have very different geometries in terms of the ligand positioning, they have the exact same splitting and in the opposite direction. On the other hand, square planar has a completely different splitting. And we only focused on like which is a ground state, which is a high excited state, and which how will the electrons fill up in the transition metal, and all that. So we never really got to the reason behind why, and rather we focused on how. In this lecture, we'll be talking about how the splitting like why is the reason behind the splitting, and not really focus on the degree of splitting and the other effects. So uh, first we have to talk about the symmetries of the isolated atom before even the ligands approach. The isolated atom has an orthogonal symmetry. Okay, wait, I think I missed the slide. So given any Hamiltonian, if G is the group of symmetries, as Shubhadeep pointed out in his lecture, let O of G be the operator corresponding to any group element small g, then it should commute with the Hamiltonian. Also, any eigenstate, if there is an eigenstate of H, then every eigenstate that is rotated by this group element should also be a eigenstate with the same eigenvalue. In essence, if we take a set of all rotations, or if Gi is an element of capital G, then OGI ket chi, the set of all of it will give me a degenerate set of states. There might be other states with the same eigenvalue, but all of these states will definitely be degenerate with each other. So symmetry gives rise to degeneracy. So I just mentioned that there could be other eigenstates that might have the same eigenvalue, even though they are not related to by rotation of any group element. Now, the cases like that comes from something called hidden symmetry, which basically means we don't know the symmetry yet, but there will be some symmetry. Moreover, if we take this set of all rotated Ketchais, then it forms an error. Well, like while I don't have a mathematically rigorous proof for this statement, although it's a very big one. One thing you can justify is any two elements in this set are related by some rotation. So you can't exactly have an invariant subspace in this set. So that is one way of justifying why this is an error. And so in case of an isolated atom, that's what we were talking about. It has an O3 symmetry, which is orthogonal symmetry. And because of the rotational symmetry, like rotational symmetry comes from SO3, which is a subgroup of O3, we have YLM theta phi, the spherical harmonics, which form a complete and good basis for the system. And if you look at it, any two y for any L and we have and m not equal to m prime, these two states just differ by a rotation. They have the same parity and they have the same eigenvalue. So if I take for any L all 12 plus 1 spherical harmonics, they are degenerate and they differ by a group element. Basically, in the last slide, what I said, it forms an error. Again, this is just of explaining why it forms an error. So the spherical harmonics for a given L form a 2L plus 1 dimensional error, which also explain why they are degenerate for an isolated atom in the first place. So the whole theory, although it is an application in certain area of chemistry, is only relies on symmetry breaking. In class, we encountered what will happen if we break the symmetry, and we looked at a square molecule and how the group and the errors like transform when we distort it into a rectangle. So the whole lecture is essentially an application of that in one specific situation, and with a bigger group and different type of group in some sense. So when these ions are approaching the center, they're essentially breaking the symmetry, because as a complex as a whole, it does not have the continuous O3 symmetry anymore. You can't rotate by any random angle you feel like, because the atoms will change their position now. So from a continuous group, now we have a discrete small group, and that will change the behavior of the atom significantly, the behavior and orbital of the atom significantly. So now to understand how the errors will break up, we first need to know the conjugacy classes of O3 and how the character table of the spherical harmonics under the conjugacy classes. This so that we can we can see how these 2L plus 1 errors break up when we break the symmetry. So if we take Ci, which is E and inversion group, it's a 2-element group. As the inversion group, then O3 can be split up in as a product of two subgroups, SO3 and Ci. And SO3 is a set of all proper rotations, and the conjugacy classes of SO3 are basically characterized by the angle they are rotated. This is because you can't change you can't associate two different rotations with different angles by a similarity transformation, but you can change the axis of a rotation through a similarity transformation. So each conjugacy classes is characterized by the angle by which it is rotated, and we do not really care about which axis we are considering. And for the rest of the talk, we'll be considering rotation about z-axis, because any other rotation can be achieved by a similarity transformation. So, and Ci being a 2-element group, and it's abelian basically, it has two conjugacy classes, identity and inversion. So if we put the classes of these two groups together in the direct product, we have the O3 will have 4 classes major: identity, inversion, C alpha, which are the rotations, proper rotations, and S alpha, which are improper rotations, basically rotations followed by inversion. And there will be a slight confusion in the notation here, because when we say C alpha, we mean rotation by 2 pi by alpha. But in some cases, to avoid confusion, I got confused, and instead I wrote alpha plus pi. Really be alpha plus pi, because it will signify alpha is an angle rather than number of order of the rotation. Then now we'll be looking at the representation of the 2l plus 1 spherical harmonics irreps under these conjugacy classes. So we have 4 classes listed in the column, and the first column, the second column, is the group action, and we have the character table. Under identity, well, it doesn't change. So the character will give us the number of elements in that representation, which is the dimension. And under rotation, I just mentioned that we'll be rotating around the z-axis. So we'll after the rotation, the spherical harmonic will be theta comma phi plus phi alpha, which will be e power im alpha by lm theta phi. And because we have to take the trace, we will sum up over all possible m from minus L to L, and it's a geometric series, giving us this quantity, sine L plus half into alpha. Again, here alpha is the order of the rotation, and here alpha is the angle. I'm sorry for that confusion in the convention. Now, for inversion, the spherical harmonic, the angles, the arguments will change by pi and on both the arguments, and we will get from minus 1 whole power L. You can see all of this by looking at the expression of the spherical harmonic. So there is nothing really hidden here. And because for each m we have minus 1 whole power L, we sum up over all m's from minus L to L, and we get this quantity. And for S alpha, it is a combination of rotation and inversion. So we get minus 1 whole power L into sine L plus half alpha sine alpha by 2 for every m. So this will be the quantity for, minus 1 whole power L into e power im alpha, and we will sum up over that. So we get a combination of this and this. So these are the behavior of YLM theta phi under rotations and inversions. So even after the symmetry breaks up, the group, the resultant group is not a continuous group, but it is made of rotations and inversions and improper rotations. So knowing this table will help us even while constructing the behavior of YLM theta phi, even under the small group actions. Also, please stop if there is any confusion. If I am moving too quickly.
Well, so the only objection I have is you're going a bit too fast, perhaps. Do you really need to? Because you said you had only 40 minutes to speak about.
Yes, sir. I mean, it's
so you can slow down a bit.
No, it's not because I'm doing it voluntarily. Yes, okay, sir. I'll try to be slow. So,
okay. Anybody else has a question?
I mean, the rest of the talk will be applications of. We'll be dealing with examples. So, if any questions, that would be. It will be easier for you in the rest of the talk.
Monica, could you just explain that L plus alpha, L plus half into alpha and alpha confusion?
Yeah, you want this part, right?
Yes.
So basically, when we want character, we take a trace of the representation group, right? Like the matrix, the group action matrix, right?
Yes.
So now we have a 2l plus 1 representation. So it like for D, that is L is equals to 2, I will have y21, y22, y21, y20, y2 minus 1, y2 minus 2. Like that is the column I will have, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So so the action of C alpha will be represented by a 5 cross 5 matrix, right?
Yeah.
So the first element will be taken to the first element itself, but with a factor.
C to the im alpha.
Yes. So my C alpha is actually a diagonal matrix with im alpha as a diagonal elements.
Oh, okay.
So what I'm doing here is I'm taking a trace. Well, so it's basically a sum of e power im alpha from minus L to L. So
I
it is a
guess
geometry.
this confusion, or the reason why you mentioned this confusion essentially was C alpha is basically the alpha is the order, and in the rest of the formula, alpha is the angle of rotation. That's really 2 pi by that alpha. So maybe
Yes.
Cn, from the context, it should be obvious whether you're referring to an integer or which is the order of rotation, or the actual angle of rotation, which of course is everything in the formula that you see. Phi equals to phi plus alpha, right? So the angle increases by alpha. That alpha is the angle. Whereas C alpha, in the C alpha, the alpha is really the order. So that's really 2 pi. What they are related to each other by their product being 2 pi.
Yes.
So two different things are being called alpha. That's the only real confusion. Of course, you explained why the trace is going to be that way. That's fine. But I think that was not the confusion you were asking about. Or I may
Yes,
be
yes.
wrong.
Oh,
No, no,
okay.
yes,
Sorry.
asking about that alpha, 2 pi by alpha, and the alpha is the angle. Thank
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. So any other confusions at this point? Okay. So the rest of the talk will be dealing with specific geometries and what the resultant groups that we get from it, and see how the degeneracy split up, like SPDF, if they do split up, how and what. So first we start with octahedral crystal field. Octahedral crystal field has a symmetry group OH. I mean, it doesn't give really information, but it's the notation for the symmetries of a cube. Why does it have? Why does an octahedron have the symmetries of a cube? It's because you can fit a octahedron inside a cube, and any symmetry for any rotation or any reflection, if the cube is invariant, then even the octahedron is invariant. So essentially, both of them have the same symmetries, and it is a direct product of two groups again, O and inversion group Ci, that I mentioned earlier, identity and the inversion group. So O is the group of proper rotations of a cube. Now there are three kinds of rotations in the cube. C4 passing through the face centers, and C3 passing through the body diagonals, and C2 passing through the edge centers. So even in C4, like C4 is 4 rotations, but the 2 C4 rotations gives us another C2. And it should be noted that the C2 passing through the face diagonal and C2 passing through the edge center are not equivalent. They form different conjugacy classes because we cannot rotate from this C2 to this C2. So they, even though they are essentially do the same, they are part of different conjugacy classes. So we'll first construct the irreps of O, and then we'll construct the irreps of Ci. And using that, we'll look at the nature of the irreps of OH. Actually, the irreps of O are enough to classify the splitting of SPDF, which I'll explain sooner, very soon. So we first look at the irreps of O, which is this one. And as Shubhadeep pointed out, the convention, we assign all the irreps A if their principal axis have +1, which, okay. So, and this is a irreps of inversion group, and OH will have classes and irreps. The classes of OH, just like O3, will be a copy of this straight first we have, and then the elements of these classes along with the combination of inversion, that will give me a second copy of the conjugacy classes. So the number of conjugacy classes in OH are double the conjugacy classes of O. And similarly, any irrep of O, if and along with the combination of I. So it could be symmetric or anti-symmetric. If it's symmetric, then we have the subscript G, which means gerade, which is a German word for symmetric, and U means ungerade, which is a German word for asymmetric. No, anti-symmetric. So like the irrep of OH will have a component of O, and depending on its behavior under Ci, it will have G or U. So we have 10 irreps and 10 conjugacy classes. Then the total character table of OH is kind of huge, and it's very complicated, and it has so many elements. So we will not be bothered. We won't use this much, but I just wanted to show the whole thing. And if you can see the block with this the Garade part in the first 5 conjugacy classes and the first 5 rows, this block is exactly the same as a lower block. But the difference is the difference between upper block and the lower block is its behavior under inversion. So I just wanted to point out. So this is the reason why we'll be dealing with only the first 5 conjugacy classes. That will give us all the necessary information we need. Now, one other point I wanted to show is given an L, its character under inversion was -1 whole power L, and it will not change under any rotations or so, or even if it's an OH. So if we have like S orbital, it will be symmetric under inversions. So it will fall in the top block, and we have to find out if it's A1, A2, EG, T1, or T2. But we don't really need to worry about the lower block. If it's P, then we have to worry about if which of the lower block it is and not the upper block. So that is one more reason why we are only concerned with the first 5 conjugacy classes, because we can already split our choices by half based on I. So using a great orthogonality theorem, no, not great orthogonality theorem, basic behavior of the formula that we calculated right before the section where we talked about rotations and proper rotations, the characters under rotations, improper rotations, and inversions. We can calculate the characters here. The exact same formula follows here, the one where Anur announced a doubt. So and then we use the great orthogonality theorem to find out which irreps are in that S does not split up into anything. It remains an irreducible representation, and so does P. But D splits up into 2 irreducible representation. One is a doublet, and this is a triplet. EG is a doublet, and T2G is a triplet. And EG is dx square minus y square dz square, while T2G is dxy yz dzx. Now we came to the same exact conclusion even during the first year, but our reasoning was that based on the spacing of the ligands, like the orbitals that were along the axis had higher repulsion when compared to the orbitals that were not along the axis. So we just gave a very hand-wavy explanation for the splitting. While it would work for the d orbital, it might not work for very complicated cases, the higher and higher cases, because we are relying here on imagination rather than the reason behind why the splitting happens. And F splits up into one-dimensional irrep and two different three-dimensional irreps, as shown there. And I also wrote G and U correspondingly with for odd and even L, as you can see. So that ends the topic about octahedral crystal field. And it does explain about splitting, but it does not talk about which will be the ground state or which will be the exciter state. Next, we'll be going to tetrahedral crystal field. Like any confusions at this point, or was it okay? Okay. So we'll be going to tetrahedral crystal field. Now, the symmetry group for this crystal field is TD, which is again a notation, which is equivalent to the permutation group S4. And this group is actually a subgroup of OH. But how can I say that? This is because a tetrahedron can be fit inside a cube with alternating vertices. So like whatever the symmetry of a TD is, it will essentially remain leave the cube invariant. So it should be a part of OH as well. So the main elements of TD are rotations, and there are 2 types of rotations, as you can see, reflections and improper rotations. There is no point center of inversion in this group, but there are improper rotations. And as you can see, the first figure is C2 rotation, rotation by pi, and this is C3 rotation. So we will jump right into it and construct the irreps and the splitting of SPDF. And because it is equivalent to S4, we already calculated the character table for S4 in the class. So that I'm just basically copy pasting here. And on the top row, I mentioned all the equivalent elements in terms of S4 notation. So like four numbers on the vertices, and you can see that all the equivalents. And for the gamma S and SPDF, you just calculate based on how based on the formula that we calculated in the before the octahedral section, the characters under O3, which are rotations. So these are the rotations, and we get the exact same splitting as we saw in octahedral field, but with a small difference. Because we do not have a center of inversion element in the group, we do not have a splitting as Garade and Ungarade. So whatever the representations we have, we do not have any subscript G or U. We can't say if we can't exactly, it's neither symmetric or anti-symmetric. That's not, we can't say about that. So the splitting is the same, but we do not have the symmetry labels in this case. But why, you may ask, why is the splitting the same? This is because the character table of the TD looks very similar to the character table of O. I probably, no. Yes, it's exactly the same. And the even some more surprising part is that this the last two conjugacy classes are not rotations but reflections. So they should have a determinant of -1. So and O only had proper rotation. So it's kind of surprising that a conjugacy class that had only rotations has the same characters as a conjugacy class that has reflections as well. Now, I mean, one possible reason, I'm not sure if this is correct or wrong, but I can say is because if you look at the character table in the Ungarade section, well, we can safely focus on Ungarade section because center of inversion doesn't make any sense in the tetrahedral case anyway. You can see that the 6C4 has the same elements as 6S4 and 6 sigma D. These are the classes we had in the tetrahedral group, and this 6C2 is 6C2 and 6C4 were the classes we had in O, subgroup O in octahedral field. They have the same characters, and that is the reason why we have this exact same splitting, even if the subgroup is different. So, and also even if the splitting is same, the ground state and the excited state is reversed in tetrahedral. So that ends the tetrahedral. It was quite short because it was mainly built on whatever we did in octahedral field. And then we get to square planar crystal field, which will not take much time as well. Any confusions at this point? Okay. So square planar.
The only thing is you are still going too fast. Slow down.
Sorry.
And you don't have to pound on the keyboard that hard. It's going to change anyway.
No, sir. It's an external keyboard and it's way too close to the microphone.
Okay, but are you nervous or something? Why are you going this hard?
I can't control. Yes, I'll try to
slow down. Basically, because there's presentations for projects also coming up, right? Later on, there will be presentations for projects and other things. You have to be. You will have less time, but then you look. Even if you have less time to finish your topic in, you can't sound hurried. That's not a good thing to sound like.
Yes, yes.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So now we'll be dealing with square planar crystal field, and its symmetry group has a notation of D4H, and the symmetry elements of this group are mainly consists of rotations, reflections, and improper rotations. There is no picture of improper rotations here, but you can see the pictures of rotations and reflections here. There are two kinds of rotations, planar and non-planar. Planar rotations, in planar rotations, the axis is perpendicular to the plane of the molecule, and the non-planar is kind of like a flipping of the molecule. So even in this case, just like a octahedral crystal field, in octahedral crystal field, we had two inequivalent C2 rotations. Here we have three inequivalent C2 rotations, one coming from the C4 in this C4, one from here and another from here. These are inequivalent because C2 prime and C2 double prime are inequivalent because we do not have a 45-degree rotation symmetry in the group. We also saw something similar to this even in the symmetry breaking from square to a rectangle, where some of them were split up into multiple conjugacy classes. So because it has a center of inversion, the D4H has a center of inversion, we can again split it up into a direct product of proper rotations and inversions. Now D is the group of proper rotations which is equivalent to the symmetries in 2D. Now the symmetry, we worked with the group of symmetries of a square in 2D. It had 8 elements and with reflections and rotations. The reflections in the 2D are equivalent to rotations in the 3D. So that's why there we can see an equivalence here. Now we will follow the exact procedure that we followed in for octahedral and tetrahedral. We first look at the irreps of the symmetry resultant symmetry group, and then we'll decompose SPDF from into the new irreps that we have. Now D is same as I said, it's the symmetries in 2D. So we calculated that irrep in the class as well, and this is the irrep. But the notation I'm following from the inorganic chemistry notation, and this is the center of inversion. Just
by the way, this is not just inorganic chemistry notation. That's standard notation which is used in molecular physics everywhere. Do you know the name of this notation?
Which rotation, sir?
This notation has a name, right? It's named after somebody.
No, sir. No, sir. I don't know.
Anybody here knows what the notation is called? Shubhadeep, you use the same notation. So you know the name for this? Shubhadeep, you were not here. You were just disconnected, I guess. What I asked was, you use the same notation for the representation.
Yes, sir. Just a call came, so my hotspot connection got.
Yeah, I know. At least I know that you got disconnected. Now, the question I was asking is, you use the same notation for different reps, A1, A2, B1, B2, etc. What is this notation called?
This is called the Schonflies notation something.
No, you're confusing this with something else. Schonflies is also important, is also relevant, but not here. Anyway, find out later on. This is an important enough notation to have a name. We just didn't bother talking about the names so much because names are of course important for specific applications more than general theory. But this is an important notation. You should know all about it. Okay, go ahead.
So what is the name, sir?
Find out. It's pretty straightforward. You just have to go to Google search. But if you just search A1, A2 and groups, you will immediately find out.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we have the irreps of group D and CI. First, CI we mentioned it multiple times, but for the sake of completion. And just like how we saw in OH, the D4H has two copies of conjugacy classes of D, one the same and another modified by the inversion element I. And even the irreps will get the subscript G and U depending on its behavior under inversion. And so, yeah. And so we do the same procedure. We construct the character table of S, P, D, and F, and then we see how the splitting will happen. The formula we used is again the formula that we saw in the initial case. And so S again does not split up. But P will split this time. Will split up into two irreps, one doubly two-dimensional and one single one-dimensional. You can understand this because in px and py, which are in the plane, will suffer more repulsion than pz, which will not be affected that much. So we see splitting in P, which we did not see in both tetrahedral case and octahedral case. Then we have D, which splits up into 4 different errors instead of 2 errors, showing how much affect the symmetry of the resultant group. The symmetry of the crystal field matters in the splitting degeneracy here. And this is we have 1 doublet and 3 singlets. So I also mentioned which orbital corresponds to which basic irrep. You can find out basically by seeing how each orbital behaves under all the rotation and looking at the character table. All d orbitals will be symmetric, so they will of A1, A2, B1, B2, and E. So and then F will again split up into more irreps, so 2 2-dimensional and 3 1-dimensional. So that ends my talk. It was mainly about application of symmetry breaking and how it lessens the degeneracy, and so how it gives to non-trivial effects, mainly in chemistry. So that ends my talk. And the references I used are these 3, so the Huhi textbook I used mainly for the character tables and the notations for the symmetry group point groups. And so yeah, that's basically it.
Okay, good. I think the others should also unmute, right? And first clap, then questions. Although I'm not sure sounding this apologetic about this being from chemistry is a good idea.
I mean,
So
my
this is
exposure
not
was mainly
really-
in chemistry, so.
Crystal field theory, of course, well, that's really a branch of physics which chemists use. Anyway, that's fine. It's just a matter of debate as to whether you should call it physics or chemistry. Anybody has any questions? I would have to like to ask a couple, but anybody else? Okay, if not, let me just ask just a couple of questions. You said octahedron has the same symmetry as a cube. And you said because you can fit an octahedron inside a cube, right?
Yes, sir.
Of course, the trouble is you can fit lots of things inside lots of things, right? Say you can fit a sphere inside a cube, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But the sphere doesn't have the same symmetry as the cube, right? So that argument doesn't really work very well.
So it would be more apt to say the symmetries of a cube are part of the symmetries of an octahedron.
No, that's not really true. Your statement was correct. The symmetries of an octahedron and the symmetries of cube are actually exactly the same. That's precisely why the cube symmetry group is called the O, the octahedral symmetry group. Okay. But there's a reason for that. It's not just that you can fit one inside the other. You can fit a sphere inside, as I said, you can fit a sphere inside a cube just as well. Also a cube inside a sphere.
But a sphere has more symmetries than a cube.
Yeah, but you can also, but that is true. So the question is, just fitting inside is not enough.
I mean, for every, like irrespective of the, just.
Sorry, I lost you. Are you saying something?
No, sir,
Yeah,
I just got interrupted a moment. But the difference between a sphere and an octahedron is because irrespective, as long as my cube is in one state, no, I'm sorry. The difference between a cube inside a sphere and an octahedron inside a cube is irrespective of, as long as my cube is in one state, the octahedron will be invariant. But in case of a sphere, I can't say if the cube which is inside the sphere is, let's say, in the same orientation or not. So, I mean,
true. But you're right. That's why they don't have the same symmetry group, the cube and the sphere. But on the other hand, there's a so just fitting in. What I'm trying to say is just fitting inside is not a good enough explanation for the two to have the same symmetry group. By the way, if you were to say truncate a sphere by just slicing off the corners, slicing off the vertices, do you know what you're going to get? Have you seen such structures anywhere?
I can't. Could you repeat the?
Suppose you take a cube and slice off the vertices at angles perpendicular to the diagonals. Have you seen such structures anywhere?
Something related to Euclidean, some Greek mathematicians' surfaces. I don't remember.
Oh, you did do a solid physics course, right? Things like Wigner-sized cells or Brillouin zones for the cubic symmetry.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir, regarding your question about that symmetry of octahedron and the cube, for every symmetry of cube, octahedron remains invariant. We can say that the symmetries of the cube will be a subset of symmetries of octahedron. But you can do the other way around as well. That is, fit a cube inside the octahedron, and when for every symmetry of the octahedron, the cube remains invariant. So that way you can say that cube is a subgroup of octahedron. Yeah. So they should be the same.
It works both ways. That's correct.
So that's why.
Even the fitting inside, just one way argument would have been enough if you had thought about exactly how rigidly is the octahedron fitted inside the cube. That's exactly where the octahedron is. That is, if you keep the octahedron fixed, unchanged, the cube will have to stay unchanged and vice versa. Of course, if the cube stays unchanged, suppose you take certain points inside the cube and join them together to form your octahedron. You do something to the cube and the cube stays unchanged. Then, of course, the octahedron will have to stay unchanged. But you have to figure out that the octahedron has enough rigidity in this way of acting so that it can also fix the cube. It's actually pretty straightforward. It's not really that difficult to see.
I just assumed it. I thought there should be a more rigorous explanation even for that assumption.
No, the rigorous explanation is pretty straightforward. If you just draw it inside properly, you would be able to see exactly how, if you keep the octahedron the same, the cube will have to stay the same.
Yes.
Anyway, the other question that I had was, you said conjugacy classes are characterized by angles for SO3, right?
Yes, sir.
And they are no longer characterized by angles when you come to OH, etc. But you could use the same formula for the character table.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So could you explain that a bit?
The characters don't change because, I mean, the rotation is the same. In OH and TD, they were in different conjugacy classes because there was no element that could relate both of them. Like the group is incomplete. The smaller group is kind of incomplete for them to relate. So that's why they are in different.
Exactly. There are the elements which actually made the two conjugate in the larger group is no longer there.
Yes, sir. But their behavior, the group matrix and the trace doesn't change. So they will have the same.
Right. Perfect. Okay, I'm done. But there's another question that I would like you to look at, which is this. Suppose you have this octahedral symmetry, like say, what is the simplest situation we can think of an octahedral symmetry? Say a particular at a ligand placed in an octahedral field. What would be the simplest scenario for that? Forget the full crystal, just the simplest situation where a crystal symmetry will break from the entire rotation group just to just the octahedral group. Say, suppose I just brought in two atoms on two sides equally. Okay, that will reduce the symmetry, right? If you had one charge alone, nothing else, one atom alone, nothing else, then of course it will have full rotational symmetry. But if you bring in, say, another atom from outside and place it somewhere in the vicinity, that will definitely reduce the symmetry, right? But it will give you a bigger symmetry than the octahedral. To get to the octahedral, what is the bare minimum you have to do? That's actually a pretty easy question. So just think about it. You have to essentially get the same symmetries as that of a cube by bringing in as few atoms as possible. So how would you place those atoms? Anybody else with an idea about this? Anybody?
The
Monica, you
minimum
can answer.
atoms we will need is 6. I mean, octahedron has the minimum atoms that will give us the same symmetry.
Yeah, but where would you place those atoms in relation to the ligand?
Like the edges of an octahedron.
Yeah, but okay, suppose somebody has never seen an octahedron in his life. Most people haven't, right? You just pick a person off the streets, they wouldn't know what an octahedron is, right?
Two atoms approaching in every independent axis in every 3 dimensions.
Exactly. You just put one in the front, one in back, one to the left, one to the right, one above, one below. That's it. That's the easiest way to get an octahedron actually also, but it's just basically from the all 6 sides. Okay. But now I have another question for all of you. Just think about it. If you place say plus q charges at these 6 points, which basically are A0, 0, 0, A0 and so on. A00 minus A0, minus A00, 0, A0, 0 minus A0 and 0, 0, A00 minus A. With respect to the origin, where the ligand is, the potential at the origin is pretty straightforward. You can also find out the approximate value for the potential anywhere near the origin just by using Taylor expansion, right? If you just take point charges, just take 6 point charges, place at these 6 locations so that you have octahedral symmetry. Okay. Now, my question is, can anybody guess if you were to expand in say XYZ, what would the potential be like? That is, what would the lowest powers be like of XYZ?
So
No,
could you repeat the question?
So suppose I just place 6 point charges at these 6 locations and wanted to find out the potential near the origin. Okay. That means XYZ is much smaller than this distance A. And I just want to expand and find out. You can of course easily do it using Taylor series. But easily is relative. If you do it using Taylor series, you will find that the calculation is rather lengthy. At the end of the day, you will find that there is only the lowest order term is actually x to the 4 plus y to the 4 plus z to the 4. Okay. That's what will come out. The lowest order non-vanishing term. Now, the reason for that can also be found from group theory, using essentially the kind of argument that you used a while ago. Essentially using the fact that since the system has an octahedral symmetry, the potential should also have such a symmetry. So the potential should essentially behave like, say, the invariant representation of this. Something which does not change under any one of the group operations. So even something as simple as doing a Taylor series and finding out the answer can be actually motivated by group theory rather well. Not rather well, can be exactly motivated just by using group theory. And in addition to that, what you were saying so far is group theory can explain the splitting, but not how big the splitting is. And you're perfectly right. However, it can even tell you the relationship between, it can't tell you how big the splitting will be, but it can actually sometimes even tell you the relationship between different splittings. Whether one is bigger, one is double the other, one is 1/3 the other, and so on. Of course, for that, only the group theory will not do. You will need to know a bit more about the details of the potential. But even there, group theory actually can help you a lot to figure out various things. So there's a lot more to crystal field theory than just the splittings that you talked about. But of course, you were essentially looking at whatever you learned in your chemistry class and we're trying to just relate that, which is great. But there is, all I'm saying is there is more to the theory than just the splittings. That's all I'm trying to say. Okay, and also whatever Shubhadeep also talked about is that once the splittings occur, do this change the fact that levels are split now? Do they change the selection rules? That's actually very important. That's essentially why crystal field theory is so important, because by looking at the kind of transitions that can occur and how the frequencies shift, you can make a lot of statements about the immediate neighborhood of a particular atom. Okay? So it's an important diagnostic tool. Anyway, that's pretty good. So thank you, but do remember to slow down and and consciously slow down. Take a breath from time to time. There are no marks for finishing ahead of time. Okay. But I do understand that when you finally give your presentations, you will usually have much less time than you think there is, and then you think is enough to finish your topic. But then there's a natural tendency to speed up too much. And that's always a bad idea. Given the fact that I am one of the worst persons to possibly talk about that, as you already know. But in my case, well, I speak that fast almost always. Okay, so if you're speaking fast when you are giving a talk and not otherwise, then you should think carefully about what you are saying.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anyway, thank you all for being here today. Tomorrow and day after, same time. Who is speaking tomorrow? And what are the topics?
Sir, I'm speaking about application of Young tableaus.
Right, good. That's you are one, and the other? Who's another one?
Sagar, sir.
No, Sagar.
He is-
Okay, anyway. What is Sagar speaking about? Sagar is not here right now, right?
No, sir.
Anyway, what is he speaking about? Any idea? He does know that this is going on, right? He's just keeping him informed. Did know about the timings.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But I think he actually is the one who accepted my invitation. One of those. So he should know. Anyway, it's fine. Hopefully we'll be there tomorrow. Okay. Bye for today. See you tomorrow then. Or hear you tomorrow.